currently in New York. How we got here.
I'm in Texas, 300 miles south of where we're supposed to be.
Oh dear. All right. The live thing actually worked on the first clip this time. I've had to refresh it a lot lately, but it's cooperating.
Okay. Operation is good.
Good evening.
Good evening.
What a day. That has been a good day. So we shall now continue refuting false worldviews. We talked about a few things last week. We started in on the worldview refutation process by taking evolution and ripping it up one side and down the other side. Not evolution, atheism. Evolution is, we're going to start talking about that today, which is almost a subset of atheism, because if you're going to be an atheist, you pretty much have to be an evolutionist. I haven't met a single one who isn't also an evolutionist. So we've ripped atheism one side and down the other, and then we're going to take evolution and show it to be the ridiculous philosophy that it is. But by way of quick review, there were 4 different ways that we shot atheism. I think is how I described it. What were the 4 ways? What are the 4 things that absolutely left it is eviscerated in a bleeding mess on the floor over there?
Truth.
Mm-hmm.
Truth.
Well, we talked about the issue of truth as one of the preconditions of intelligibility. We also proved God and did it from the issue of induction, which was one of the categories. That was a conversation you were having with Ray yesterday.
Yes, I was going to ask how that went. Did you get to talk to him?
I didn't get to talk to him anymore after that, sadly. But induction is one of them, because inductive inference, as we discussed, is required for any and all scientific endeavor. Evolutionists and atheists especially like to come at you and say that they believe the science and that we are trying to import some sort of a fairy tale idea into things. Like science, how do you account for induction, which you need for any and all scientific inference? Well, if they're honest about it, they'll eventually have to say, well, I just don't know. It just works. Well, I can tell you why it works and give you foundation for it. You're living off here in La La Land saying that you hold on to this thing, but really have no basis for it at all. I'm telling me that I'm the one who's opposing the science? You can't even go to lab on the first day. We had destroyed them also with regard to deductive inference, the laws of logic. Because a materialistic atheist is going to believe only in the world that he can observe, that he can see or take in with his senses. But logic, laws of logic, which are required for any and all rational thought, are concepts. They're not in the physical world. So, if you're going to say that you have logic, but only believe that which you can see and touch and hear, then you can't actually reason, because you don't have that in your worldview. So no induction, no deduction, you can't think. So we took thinking away from him, which means we took knowledge away from him. But there were a couple of other things too. How about absolute morality?
Experiences? Is that what
Well, experiences are things that I think what we talked about with regard to experience when we were referencing induction is how Bertrand Russell talked about it. Because you can't use experience to validate induction. Induction is what allows you to make sense of your experience. It gets it backwards. And we spent some time talking about Bertrand Russell and how that about drove him batty, because induction on an atheistic system is begging the question, which is a really, really big problem, a really huge philosophical problem. That isn't a problem for the Christian, because we have a God who has created this world and has created certain laws by which this world operates, and God maintains it consistently, summer, winter, springtime, and harvest. It's like, of course we have induction. We would need that in order to learn about this world, take dominion of it, and experience the things that he's told us we need to be. It's really not hard for the Christian. But you as an atheist, denying the one true God, really don't have a basis for those things. But absolute morality is another issue. Absolute morality has to exist. Moral relativism, which is what the atheist is going to devolve into, allows you, or rather prohibits you, from having any kind of an objection to the worst villains in history. It's like, so you don't have a problem with Hitler? Well, of course I do. On what basis? He's living his best life now, killing 6 million people. So what? Well, there's that arbitrary thing floating back to haunt us. That's part of the reason why that is such a powerful refutation. And also, we give the illustration of Kroger, that a cashier cannot charge you $50 per pound of ground beef. It's simply not permitted. If he or she tries, excuse me, manager, it'll get fixed in a hurry. Because you know what, that morality thing isn't as relative as you thought it was. And you don't want to pay $50 for your ground beef. Now, for a dozen eggs, that would probably be valid, but maybe not. So that was the third one. And the fourth one is mind versus brain. We talked about that too. Because according to the materialistic atheist, we're just brain. There is not really such thing as a mind. Or if he's going to say there's such a thing as a mind, then he's going to equate that with your brain. Your brain being however tall you are above the ground. Mind is a concept and not something that you can limit to your brain. There's a relationship between the two, but they're not equated with each other because those in heaven still have their minds, they're worshiping God, but their bodies are decaying in the ground until the resurrection, when everything will be reunited and remade. And we gave the illustration: had a bottle of Coke, have a bottle of Mountain Dew, shake them up, open the top, they start fizzing. You have chemical reactions. Does it make sense to say that the Coke is true and the Mountain Dew is false? Well, no. It doesn't make sense. That's not even the right category. Exactly. For the materialistic atheist, all that constitutes our thoughts are chemical reactions. So where do you get the whole concept of true and false? Tony commented about that before. You don't. It doesn't make sense. There's no rationale for it. So the atheist got shot 4 different times, and there is no way to recover from any of that. Materialistic atheism collapses under its own foolishness. It was the prime example of give your opponent enough rope and he will hang himself. Now, we're going to launch into a related subject, the evolutionary worldview. The evolutionary worldview, just as everything else, we're going to take it through the AICP method, the 4-point checklist. This is necessary and important. Don't ever forget that. It comes up and you will tend to use it in pretty much every encounter in one way or another when you're talking to people, if you get past the first question or two. It certainly came out in all various forms, depending on who it was I was interacting with in that Wish TV post earlier this week. My goodness, they got crazy. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. Eventually people just stopped talking to me. I wasn't rude, I promise. But they don't like to answer direct questions. And they can't account for why they think they know anything. Now, there are people that will tell you that you cannot trust the Bible because it teaches creation. Special and direct creation by God. And they will tell you that we know that the human race came about through evolutionary processes over billions and billions, and insert Donald Trump quote here, billions and billions and billions of years. Well, it's extremely common. Evolution is true, so you can't trust the Bible. Well, it is, again, like I mentioned, the de facto position of atheists. It's taught at government schools at every level. It's assumed by default, and any objectors to the theory of evolution will be treated with contempt and scorn, and very often censure. Ask anybody who's a Christian and believes in the biblical creation account who works at a secular university, and they will tell you that you were treated with contempt and scorn. And very often, like I said, censure. There are theistic evolutionists, but this is a rare position, and it's considered pretty absurd by atheists and Christians alike. So, no sense really in dwelling on that too much. Those who hold to an evolutionary position have been very aggressive. They often shut out debate. They refuse to admit a hearing to biblical creation at the university level or in society in general, which is really funny how they don't want to hear the other side. But, oh well, never mind about that. Useful facts: evolution and creation science are both religious and philosophical in nature. They are both religious and philosophical in nature. Evolution is not scientific while the others are religious. They are all religious. And they're undergirding philosophical presuppositions that contribute to both. In fact, I'm just going to say this: evolution isn't even science at all. I'm not making the point that it is scientific theory and not scientific fact. That's a common thing you hear. Well, it's just a theory, it's not fact, like other would be like gravity or something. Well, it's not science. Right, it's not science at all. The point I'm making, largely thanks to Dr. Ponson, is the fact that evolution isn't science at all, rather just a philosophical worldview. That's what it is. So in the end, the way to defeat evolution is to compare it as a worldview to the Christian worldview. One of the main things to get across the people is that evolution does not have scientific credentials. There's no evidence. It doesn't even have the traits of a scientific theory, which is really contrary to what the atheist believes. Entirely so. Probably very contrary to what you've heard yourself. It is a foreign concept in the minds of many, even fellow believers. So you're probably going to need to keep shooting that idea down with the same gun. What I mean by that is if you have a good argument, a solid point, the weapon that you're using, you're going to need to drive the point home. And it may need to be repeated in order for someone to listen to you, because that's so contrary to the thinking. Think of it like a bear. You have a bear running at you in Alaska, and you have a very nice weapon, high caliber, with buffalo bore ammunition. The bear is running at you, and you fire your gun. You hit the bear once, and the bear keeps coming. It's bleeding. Does it make sense? Okay, well, I guess that didn't work. Put your gun away and say, okay, I guess I'm just going to die. No, shoot again, and keep shooting until it stops. Your bullets are good, your gun is good. Just keep at it until they actually acknowledge your argument in this particular metaphoric illustration. Say, no, that's not what I'm saying. No, that's still not right. We'll be say it again, maybe in a different way. Now you get it 10 times later. It may take that much. Because atheists, when they hear something like this, are going to go on saying that the science is on their side. The facts are with them. Like, no, it's not the case. It's not on your side. Slow down and emphasize that that's not the basis of the debate. The facts are not what we're talking about here. The way you view the facts is the issue, as we have been talking about with the other worldviews. Problems in the evolutionary theory. There are many, many challenges, to include mathematical challenges. Even secularists have objected on these grounds, mathematical grounds. Since evolutionists insist on things coming about randomly, it will take even more time than the 15 or so billion years that the secularists insist on right now, or whatever the clock is. So they've ranged from a couple billion years up to as many as 20, depending on who you talk to. But even as far back as 1967, people were saying that there would need to be new natural laws discovered to account for the sheer mathematical impossibilities that exist in an evolutionary system. A guy by the name of Michael Denton wrote a book called Evolution, a Theory in Crisis, published in 1986. He observed that to get a cell by chance, just a single cell by chance, and there are like, 75 trillion cells in your body, it would require 100 functional proteins to appear at the same time in the same place just to get the material you need for one cell. 100, not just proteins, but functional ones in the same place at once. The probability, he said, for each of those proteins to get produced by a quote-unquote random chance is 10 to the 20th power, 1 in 10 to the 20th power. I'm not going to write that on the board. It would take up most of my board. And I want my markers for other things. That's a lot. And that's just for one. Multiply that by 100. 10 to the 22nd power. A guy by the name of Fred Hoyle, a book called Evolution from Space, published in 1981, said there are about 2,000 enzymes needed for such a thing on top of that. And to get all those would be 1 in 10 to the 40,000th power. I'm definitely not writing that one on the board. Furthermore, we talked about the fossil record. You've heard that discussed from time to time. That's another challenge for the atheistic evolutionists. The fossil record does not provide the missing links they needed for, say, ape-like creatures coming into man. It just doesn't exist. You've heard about things like Piltdown Man and a host of others. Most, if not all of those, including Lucy, which they trumpeted for a long time, turned out to be frauds. Yes, another one. And I don't remember the names of all of them, but there have been a host of them, and they've been demonstrated to be frauds. So, because the fossil record creates that kind of a challenge, an alternative came up. No records of the needed intermediate forms exist. A guy by the name of Stephen J. Gould, Dr. Stephen Gould, who passed away in 2002, he came up with the idea of punctuated equilibrium. Dr. Gould, there are his dates. He was an American paleontologist, evolutionary biologist, and historian of science, who became one of the most influential and widely read science writers of his time, which is our time. He co-developed the theory of punctuated equilibrium with Niles Eldredge in 1972. This theory suggests that evolution occurs in rapid bursts, followed by long periods of stasis, rather than a slow and continuous process. So in this theory, evolution would have taken place in short spurts, punctuated by the life forms that you see, so it'll match up with the fossil record. So, quite frankly, this is what he's saying.
Go ahead. Yeah, the reason he did that is because he was trying to deal honestly with the data, and what the data showed was new forms, quote unquote, appearing with no preceding lead up,
Yes.
lead into it. So that's what the data showed. He was trying to deal honestly with it from an evolutionary perspective. He wasn't going to accept creation, or
Right,
catastrophism.
why wouldn't he do that? Because
He's committed.
Pre-commitment to evolution, his philosophical presuppositions, right?
And so Gould, he scandalized the entire the entire paleontological society with this idea when he wrote on it. But yeah, he was at least trying to deal honestly with it. I mean,
But that admission,
yeah,
that is an absolutely crushing admission.
Yeah.
he wouldn't have said it that way.
But
That's the conclusion that you have to come to.
He did write a quote, and I can't remember exactly how it went, but it was essentially in advancing his theory of punctuated equilibrium, he was arguing against the uniformitarian concept, right? So the slow,
Right.
and he utterly blasts it and refutes it. And creationists all over the place quoted him on it. They're like, see, even your own prophet said.
Yep. It's useful when you can get your enemies to defeat your own enemies.
Yeah. And they start fighting each other.
But see, that's really what it amounts to. So the evidence for evolution is that there's no evidence for evolution.
Yeah.
There aren't any traces. So does that sound like scientific proof, or does it indicate that someone had his mind made up before he started looking at the scientific record, the false record? Obviously, it's the latter. It's that whole worldview thing. People want to downplay the use of the term worldview. I just don't understand it. It is so critical in understanding how people are thinking and how to refute entire systems of belief. But so the fossil record, big problem for the evolutionary perspective. And Dr. Gould didn't help. The challenge of natural clocks. Natural clocks show that there hasn't been nearly enough time for the evolutionist belief. What do I mean by a natural clock? As opposed to an artificial clock. No. Welcome.
Things that exist in nature that show.
We're destroying evolution. Come participate. Say again.
Things in nature that show where.
That's exactly right.
Like the rings of a tree.
Sure, rings of a tree. We talked about a few of them before, like the topsoil amount. There's 6 to 9 inches of topsoil. Why not more? Well, it's washing into the ocean. Well, how come we only have about 0.5, 0.6 miles of sediment in the deepest place, in the bottom of the ocean? Shouldn't we have miles of it? If your theory is true. We talked about the amount of dust that they found on the moon when they landed on the moon. They were so scared they thought they were going to sink into the moon's surface because of how much dust must have accumulated. And I think there was like a quarter inch, I believe is what it was. They had those huge shoes on the spacesuits because they thought they were going to go in. But they just, how about meteor dust settling on the Earth? We got several feet of it here and on the moon. So
on the
that's
recessional orbit of the moon is receding from the Earth.
It is.
If we uniformly take it back, the moon would have been in contact with the Earth in far less than 4.5 billion years.
Jason Lyle was one of the first people to point that out. Actually, everyone just didn't like it.
Well, if you get it to a certain point, then it collapses on the Earth and you destroy the Earth.
But destroy the Earth, or you don't have a moon in the first place.
Right. And
so where did the moon come from?
So then they're like, well, the Earth captured a meteor flying by it, and that's what the moon is.
Yeah, that's for sure.
No. That's not how
you can talk about blue supergiant stars.
Yeah.
Like Rigel. Huge thing,
They're
many times larger than our sun.
Yeah.
They're still there.
And they're young.
Yes.
Comparatively.
Because a blue supergiant star, why are they blue? Because they're really, really hot. They burn through their fuel really fast at that heat and temperature, but yet it's still there.
In the decay of the electromagnetic field of the
Earth's
Earth,
magnetic field.
if we
All of those
trace
things.
it back, we would have been frying like a microwave just a few million years ago.
All of those things are a problem. Natural clocks show there hasn't been enough time.
So what are they saying about the blue?
Well, a blue supergiant star like Rigel, they burn their fuel really fast as opposed to a red star or a yellow star like ours. And
They're all over?
well, they exist. The fact that they exist at all, I don't know how many of them there are, but Rigel is the one people know about the most.
See, all three stars in Orion's belt are blue supergiants.
Are they?
I believe. I don't know.
But getting pictures of Rigel is a challenge because it's so stinking bright. You point the Webb telescope at it, it's like looking at the sun, right? That's kind of what it is. But it would burn through its fuel much faster. A star like that is estimated, even by secular scientists, only to be able to last 120,000 years. But
yeah, they're all supergiants.
wait a minute, it's still there.
So
There's no evidence that a new star has formed.
It created itself.
Yes.
While the Earth. Okay.
We can talk about. Let's talk about organs. I don't mean musical instruments. The challenge of interdependent organs, as in hearts and lungs and kidneys that work together, right? Hearts and lungs and kidneys. If you have a circulatory system with a 4-chambered heart, like mammals and people do, you have to have lungs, you have to have kidneys, and they all need to work together, which means they all have to come together at the same time to work in tandem. Gradual development. What would a gradually developed lung or kidney or heart look like or be useful? Yes.
I'm just wondering how they could work together if they started out as gills.
Okay, I'll take that. So evolution in this case would kill off all the creatures it supposedly produced because you can't have.
There wouldn't be any time for evolution, is what you're saying. There wouldn't be any time
No, there's no
evolution
time for it.
because-
Not only that, but you'd have to have these things swarming together in such a way to work together. You don't get the circulatory system that every single one of us has because your heart developed, and then 1,000,000 years later you get a set of lungs, and 2,000,000 years later you get a set of kidneys. No, you need them all at the same time. Earlier we talked about the fact that just to get 100 proteins together in a single cell, the mathematical odds of such a thing.
Yeah.
How about we start talking about entire organs?
Systems. Yeah.
Than systems. No, it's absurd. How about
Michael Behe wrote a book a while back. It's been 20 years.
Darwin's black box is what it was called, right?
Yeah, he gets this particular concept. He uses the example of a mouse trap. He says if you think through a mouse trap, if you have a mouse trap, it just has you've got a platform, you've got a spring, and you've got the bar that holds it back, and then you've got the thing you trip, the trigger. So it's got all those mechanisms. If you take any one of those away, the mousetrap is utterly useless, and it cannot evolve. It cannot go on and produce something bigger and better. They all have to be there at the same time. If they're not there, then you don't have a system, and there's no way for it to live. In this case, live as a biological organism. He calls it specified complexity, I believe.
Irreducible.
Irreducible complexity, yes. Yeah, that's what it is.
And it is irreducible unless you have an almighty God who put it all
Who
in
designed
order
it,
at once and holds it all together on top of that, which is pretty awesome.
And even if that, why wasn't there a competing and or similar object being created at the same time? Only humans were created. Only humans evolved. Why aren't there blue skinned humans out there with horns coming out of their head? I mean,
They were
it's just
ugly.
different set of
I think you
proteins.
better read comic
They
books,
were
Tony. No, but you're right. I think that's a great question. Seriously.
Well, I think
Different
what he's
set of
saying is if they're going to say, oh, well, this is just how it works, and eventually it evolved, all these systems evolved slowly, and it happened in such a way that they worked imperfectly until they worked perfectly. Shouldn't there be variations?
Sure.
Of
think
all
so.
of
And I'm not
those?
talking about variations like skin color or
Yeah.
ethnicity or
Yeah.
something like that. I'm talking about variations where we kept a tail.
Why don't
Variations.
we have intelligent birds?
Yeah.
With human intelligence.
Right.
Why didn't the bird offshoot, evolve like us?
Right. Why can't dogs talk?
Why didn't they experience
Because
encephalization?
they're horrible conversationalists.
That's got to be the reason.
No, those were cats.
Well, that's true too.
Food, dinner,
Play.
play.
How about the challenge of human eyesight, or even better, avian eyesight?
Avian skeletons.
Sure.
The
But,
avian lung.
so eyesight, let's just stick with the human eye because we have them. 1,000,000,000 years in the making, they might say. So what benefit would a partly developed eye be? Much like any
Zero.
other. None. Absolutely none.
Let me take my condom.
Yeah, well, this is why I'm sitting on the table. That's not benefit to anybody. The way the eye works is amazing, including the way it works and how it's connected to the back of your head and projects an upside down image that then has to be flipped around and righted and focused with a certain amount of light going in through your pupil and the iris opening. Wait, what? How did all that happen? At once, together, so that we can see.
Well, and I know you were dealing with this with your mom earlier this week as
Yes.
well. I've had the same thing happen in my left eye.
Okay.
And when you said that, it's very similar to what the diagnosis was for me. I still got spots that I could see, but it just looked like someone had brought in. I don't know if you guys ever deal with ink, but if you had a glass of water, drop of ink, that's what it looked like when it first happened.
Yeah, that's kind of what she was describing. Yeah.
Yeah. So and having that, and this is anecdotal evidence only, but because we're talking about the eye, but that one thing. It took away depth perception. It took away sight. It took away colorization, and it took. You don't understand
One
about
thing went
how
wrong.
affected you are with just one little thing happened.
And that
all
was
it
one
was-
small part of your
Right.
eye that went wrong.
Yeah.
The whole thing collapses.
Exactly.
Excellent point.
And
Great illustration.
those animals would have been wandering into their predator's cage.
And they would all be dead.
Oh, look, it's
Said their predators can't see either.
and this is how DoorDash was invented.
Over
Oh,
here.
details,
Over
Rachel.
here. I won't hurt you. Over here.
Oh, mercy. The next challenge of sexual reproduction. It does not fit the evolutionary model at all. Full stop. It just cannot. Okay, human children normally come one at a time. Sometimes you get twins or triplets or whatever, but it also takes 9 months of gestation on average to have a healthy baby born. Now, if the claim of the evolutionist is true, we all used to be a bunch of single-celled organisms way back in the evolutionary chain, but we're so much more advanced now. How does that make sense in terms of reproduction? Reproduction and survival, by the way.
Those three underneath there, the last three is humans,
Well,
not animals, or not whatever.
Either
Well,
Mammals.
again, they're going to be talking about, the reason I'm using humans as an example is the fact that we're supposed to be the top of the evolutionary paradigm. We're it at the moment. We are the highest level, apex, good word, of the
When
evolutionary
evolution
scheme.
was taught, they were referring to animals, everything,
Sure.
all of life.
They were referring to even chemicals.
So does this apply to them?
It does to a degree, sure, because you could use you could even use cats, dogs, pigs, horses, cows. I don't care, some sort of bird or an animal. Because
They all
they're
have-
gonna be,
The whole thing
anything that produces bisexual reproduction. The point is that sexual reproduction in any organism doesn't fit the evolutionary model, and the reason for that is because of the importance the evolutionary schema places on survival.
Right.
And reproduction as in survival. Unicellular organisms, things like amoeba, paramecia, those kinds of things, they often reproduce asexually by cell division and mitosis. And they do so in much greater numbers and much more quickly than just once every 9 months or more.
They're much more effective at it. Yeah.
In fact, in most situations, it's not just once 9 months for the gestation period, it's a couple of years for other issues related to it. So not only is the human reproductive system extremely complicated, how does any of that develop gradually, and how is it more beneficial than asexual reproduction? I thought we were the apex of evolutionary arrival.
Well, there should be no sexually reproducing organism because there's nothing on the asexual reproduction scale. There's nothing to favor a sexual reproduction mutation. Let's say, and that's another whole argument on its own, which I would love to, if you want me to put it on a Punnett square, but the idea of moving from an asexual, which is perfectly fine and allows for a much more hardy survival rate than sexually reproducing. Now, sexual reproduction does allow for the shuffling and reorganization of genetic information, but if you don't need that, then why even move to that? But anyway, you've got to have, the thing about this is you have to have a mutation over here that changes an asexually reproducing organism to a male, and a separate mutation over here that changes an asexual, the same,
Right.
into a
The
female.
timing has to be right, otherwise.
And how do you get? I mean, even just one of those leaps is beyond our the fathoming of odds.
And you get all of the same
And
problems.
you have to
that we
have
talked
two
about
of them in the
before
same
with all the
generation, in the same proximity,
Mhm.
so that they can come together and then sexually reproduce. And then you have a problem of the Adam and Eve thing, where if everything is as it is now, you're going to have genetic mistakes, and you have one pair. What happens when you have one parent and their children reproduce with each other, and their children reproduce? You're going to have that sort of compounding of genetic mistakes.
And then everything dies.
It's not a helpful mutation, even if it happened. Which getting a mutation like that is never going to happen anyway.
But no, evolution doesn't have any problems.
It does according to science.
I mean, yeah. Notice, I'm not even having to quote scripture here.
It defeats itself. Yeah.
Give your opponent enough rope. You want to talk about science? Oh, okay, we can do that. And he will hang himself.
The problem is that people are taught evolution; they're not taught science. And I figured this out when I came to Christ. I was a convinced evolutionist. And 2 years into my walk with Christ, I came to a crisis of faith around the issue of evolution, because I knew that evolution, and I was not one of these guys who was willing to say, okay, there's these various theories that kind of wed evolution and creation together. I knew that what the Bible said contradicted what science taught, or what I learned in my science classes.
What they claim science.
Yes, and so I started studying it, and the more that I studied it, the more that I saw the science, not the propaganda, and not the ho hum sort of thing. The more that I saw the actual science, it's like, this is impossible. I mean, it's not even good science, and so people who claim to believe in science and who espouse evolution, just like the guy that I talked to yesterday morning is like, you don't believe in science. You're a man of faith, just like everybody else.
And what he came down to is what we're going to get to here in a few minutes, the end of it.
Yeah, sorry.
But this process was not argued in the sixties.
It was Henry Morris argued it.
No, I mean, in the schools,
Well, of course not.
evolution was it.
Oh yeah, it still is. But
They
they
didn't
push
bring
it so
up
hard,
the
which is,
other
but
part.
it cannot
They didn't bring
withstand
up
debate. It
creation.
cannot withstand examination. Especially when
And
you
that is
start
why
throwing
we
this
need
stuff
to.
out.
That's why we need to we need to get rid of government run schools because that's what.
Heliocentric theory used to be.
But in the 30s, creation was taught in public schools. So a generation before you, it was.
A lot later. No, it's the sixties.
Oh, and that's what I'm saying.
Into the sixties.
Yeah, I'm saying a generation earlier than that, though, in the 30s, because the Scopes trial was in what, 1929?
I don't remember.
I was
And-
there and I believed it at the time.
Sure. I mean, I did one out before I was.
No.
But it was presented as fact. It was presented as "quote unquote" settled science. It wasn't presented with anything like this that we're talking about this evening. But that's not all.
Sorry.
You guys, these questions. So, how did disorder become order?
Let there be light.
There never was disorder.
That's how. When God spoke and imposed order on chaos.
Exactly.
Imposed order. Period. There really wasn't even chaos before that, right? How does non-life become life?
According to science,
It can't happen.
yeah, the biogenesis is impossible. So, and that's scientific law, by the way.
Oh yeah, I know. You want to talk like
So-
spontaneous generations? Like I thought
Yeah.
we tossed that out a long time ago. How does life become so complex? We talked about single cell organisms. How do we get all the diversification and variation in life? Where does intelligence come from? Not just the fact that we have variations.
Let us create man in our image.
Again, the Christian has no problem with any of this.
Yeah.
Because we have a God who set everything in order and told us how he did it, and it's like, well, duh, because God made us this way. We talked about the image of God in Sunday school this morning. We talked about the issue of moral notions. Where do we get the idea of right and wrong if we're all just, brain fizz?
You shall have no other gods before me.
The answer, and Raymond said this after you asked him enough questions, I think you were getting into an introduction at that point. If they are honest, the answer to all of these things will always be, we don't know.
It's exactly how he answered it.
We don't know, just
He said it's just common sense.
You don't say it comes from the Bible, the moral notions?
Oh, yes, we
Well,
say
no,
it.
absolutely. We say that as
Absolutely.
Christians.
Yeah.
But the atheist, the evolutionist, when he's been pressed on all of these things, and you take away all of his smoke screen, it's like, how do you account for this? The moral notions, intelligence, diversity in life, life itself from non-life, order out of disorder, or the reproductive system, the eye, multiple organs having to come together all at once. If what you're saying is true, then all of these things have to happen, and that's impossible. So explain that to me. Well, I don't know. In other words, you believe it on some understanding of, except you don't have a grounding for your faith.
Right.
Remember something I said very earlier on in this course? Faith is only as good as its object. We have faith in the one true God who gives us a basis for the life that we see in the world today. Well, everything else, but since we're on the subject of talking about life. You see, sometimes the best refutation for the theory of evolution is to repeat it. Like, you believe life came from non-life. You think that all these organs in a circulatory system for a mammal or a human came together all by itself, all at once. And you say that I don't like science. It's really very absurd. And when you put it all together, like we've done to some degree this evening, it becomes very clear just how absurd it is. You see, your friend does not believe in evolution because of its sterling scientific credentials. It's silly. They believe it because they have a recommitment to it. That is why they believe it. Because, why? The atheist needs it. He needs it because he cannot uphold any semblance of order in his worldview without it. Because the only alternative is the one true God created all of this, and he didn't bow his knee to Jesus. I will not do it. Well, that'd be absurd. Have no foundation for anything. Live a meaningless, nonsensical life. And think that you can somehow get off the hook by saying that you believe in the science. Man, there's a better way. Bow the knee to Jesus. Have forgiveness of your sins. Have your rationality saved, for crying out loud. That's what it amounts to. The whole evolutionary system is ridiculous. It's simply so. The emperor has no clothes. But people believe it. People with a lot more education than any of us believe it. Multiple PhDs. As I said, evolution is ultimately believed because it harmonizes with secular atheistic scientific thought, not because they can justify it, because they can't. Even Stephen Gould admitted that gradual evolution was a metaphysical position, not one that has been observed. And though he didn't say it directly this way, it's an admission that it's a philosophical commitment. It's a fairy tale for grown-ups. It's not scientific, but it does prove useful for secularists as a way to mock religious commitment, which is why they keep doing it, even if they don't realize that's why they keep doing it. It's been said, and I agree, you take away the first 3 chapters of the Bible, you lose it all. So they attack it relentlessly. Sure. Answers in Genesis likes to talk about the first 11 chapters because, of course, the flood and the Tower of Babel. But they're right. That's why they spend so much time defending it, because it's so important.
Yeah, it was, who was it? There was a philosopher.
I regain my bearings here with my notes. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Who came along around the time of Darwin, and it was an atheist who said that finally with Darwin, we have the ability to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist because we have this explanation, because the Christians of that day would always hammer them, with how did all this happen, and with Darwin they thought that they had achieved that. And they hadn't, of course, but because even with Darwinian evolution, there were some serious problems even from the beginning. But they they recognized the need, and they recognized that that's what this was good for. It was an explanation, it was a theological explanation. And interestingly enough, there was I can't remember his name now. There was another thinker that came along and said that what Darwinism was, at least in the beginning, the book was called Darwin's God. I can't remember the name of the person, but he was another scientist. He was a microbiologist, I believe. But he talked about the fact, and he researched and presented that what Darwin was trying to do is he was trying to actually respond to the problem of evil, because back in those days, everything was looked at as so wonderful and so great, and God, look at all this wonderful order that God has instilled in the universe, and then you look at the wonderful order that God instilled in the universe, and you see billions of tons of pollen being wasted every year, and you see the lion eating the zebra on the African plain, and tell the zebra that everything works together really, for the betterment of things, while he's being devoured alive.
It'd be better if the zebras are better with ketchup. That might have solved the problem.
Yeah, maybe. But he was trying to explain that and trying to alleviate God from making this creation that was red in tooth and claw and that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't think that was Darwin's actual premise, at least not in the end. Not when he writes The Descent of Man, which is 15 years later. And he's all whole hog about his the idea that men descended from lower primates, and even to the point where he is embracing and endorsing eugenics at that point. So yeah.
All right. Any other comments about evolution before we move on to another set of worldviews? It's silly. Go over in the notes, talk about it. You get some arrogant atheistic evolutionists yelling in your face about how he believes the science, and all of you have his fairy tales. Like, have you really thought about this?
No.
You haven't. But enough rope to hang himself. So we're going to move on to some other approaches. We're going to talk about mind and body dualistic approaches. We're going to talk about religious worldviews as well, but non-religious ones first. So we talked about the various ways people view the world. We talked about before, talked about monism, dualism, materialistic atomism, those kinds of things. Well, let's talk about this guy briefly, but we're going to do it because secular idealism and dualism. Plato is, I call him the king of the idealists because he is the most brilliant idealistic philosopher in the history of the world, considered so by many. And we need to deal with some of the things he said in a little bit more detail and refute them and demonstrate that they collapse on themselves, just like any other false worldview. Part of the reason for this is so important, as I mentioned before, is that there are a lot of people these days that are still holding to Platonism, even seeking to marry it to Christian theology. That's not a good thing. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about how to refute it. And being the king of the idealistic, dualistic philosophers, if you take down the leader, well, anybody else who comes behind him isn't going to be as good, so they're refuted as well, basically. Now, Plato, what did he believe about the world? What did he believe? He didn't believe the physical world was the ultimate reality. The physical world is not the ultimate reality. Rather, he believed that since the physical world was always changing, therefore it couldn't be the object of true knowledge. Something is in flux, you can't really know it, he said. So the thing we really know has to be outside the physical world, outside of time and space. I did the little demonstration in here too. We destroyed the number 2 the other day. We had it in my slideshow. It's like, is this 2? Well, then we changed slides and erased it. Because there's the difference between an instantiation of 2, the numeral 2, and something that you might refer to as two-ness, the concept of 2 that exists in this world, in this universe. When I erased it, changed the slide, erased it off the board over here, it doesn't change the nature of reality. We can still go to a vending machine that charges $2 for a bottle of Coke, and if we put the $2 in, we'll still get a bottle of Coke. And it's still going to charge us $2 even if I erase the number 2 off my board the previous day. They won't start dispensing them for free. So, you cannot stub your toe, for example, on 2. Maybe 2 chairs, if you had them in your room and you weren't paying attention, do it twice. You can't stub your toe on humanity. You can't stub your toe on duckness. They are concepts, and as such, you cannot handle them, taste them, touch them, or otherwise engage them with your physical senses. Concepts. Individual people and individual ducks are in this world, individual chairs, individual bottles of Coke, but not the concepts of them. Those are things that we think about. Plato posited a realm, a separate realm for all of these ideas, these forms, as he called them, outside of the physical realm. Now, Plato wasn't consistent even in this, because according to him, not everything had a form. He denied there were forms and ideas for certain things like hair or warts or feces. Probably not Canadian geese either, nasty things. But they don't have forms. But so you ask the question, well, how do we know about them then? Well, we're left to wonder. Because he said there wasn't a need for a form for those things. So already we see an inconsistency. Remember AICP? We're already failing, aren't we? Noble concepts, however, concepts other than things like hair or warts, such as goodness, beauty, truth, and duckness. I'm not sure why duckness keeps coming up. But it could be sponsored like ducks. That's what he always talks about. Induction. Yes, induction is the insertion of ducks. Deduction is the removal of ducks. We need to say that. But anyway, for all of these things, there is a realm of ideas or ideals where they are found. So, we find ducks in this world. But duckness is in the ideal realm above. This is not heaven, by the way. It's important. This is not a religious worldview.
Right.
Do not confuse the realm of forms with heaven. It's not the same. They're categorically different. It's not the same. There are those who, well, they wouldn't call themselves Platonists. They prefer to be materialistic atheists, probably. They can't maintain their materialism when you start confronting them with things like logic. So, well, maybe there's such a thing as logic. Oh, so you're a Platonist then. Maybe a Plato wannabe kind of thing. But they want to be empiricists. That is, everything is only knowable through your senses. But they also believe like things like love or hatred, compassion, justice, stuff like that. They're not going to be nearly as sophisticated in Plato in setting up their way of thinking. No one ever was. They are akin enough to him philosophically that if you talk to someone like this who denies religious claims, you should think something else. So this is just kind of Plato wannabe. He'll go into this category in as much as he would an atheistic or evolutionary category. Knock them all down then. Let's do this. Plato's idealism was the most rigorous in the history of philosophy. As I said, we take him down, everything else falls. So we have particulars in the physical realm, like this pulpit here, the chair you're sitting on. We have universals, chairness, pulpitness. Weird word. And the idea is they're going to be in a different realm altogether. The problem is this really is terrible philosophy. It really is terrible. Because there's a question that we need to ask in order to expose this. What's our question? The same question we ask anybody, really. So you believe that there's this other realm, this realm of forms. How do you know that? Explain this to me, please, because this sounds kind of goofy. He would say that he's never seen this realm because it's not open to the senses. didn't answer my question. How do you know? Okay, he would maintain the realm exists as a rational necessity because we don't have what could make sense of rational experience. That kind of sounds familiar. A little. It should.
Plato taught that all knowledge was remembering. All knowledge is recollection. He believed that we existed in the realm of the ideals or the forms before we were born, and when we were incarnated, we lost this memory. Of course, then you ask,
How do you know that? It's like, that doesn't escape.
Yeah.
But you see, that reality and the
And when you
fact
said
that he would
it's
say
true,
something like
logical
that,
necessity, yeah.
that's almost a transcendental argument. The fact that he would say those kinds of things, that's why so many people in the early church had such a hard time with Platonic concepts. Platonic philosophy. Some even claim Plato was a kind of crypto or secret Christian because he would talk like this. The claim was that Plato represented the Christian worldview and then he wanted to put him right on the edge of heaven. Well, why would they do this? And the reason is Plato was right in that there must be something other than this world, the physical world, or this physical world doesn't make sense. Okay, that's true. But the way he went about trying to explain it and prove it was a total failure. Do you know, you don't get the answer. Do you know who it was who refuted Plato and his dualistic idealism with his two realms? Who did that? Who finally put him down? Didn't take long.
Socrates.
Socrates came before, I believe. Aristotle. Aristotle effectively refuted him back in the day. Who was Aristotle? He was his best and brightest student. He was Plato's own pupil. And Aristotle's like, no. Aristotle's best known student was church history students. Alexander the Great came after Aristotle. Anyway, Aristotle's response to Plato was classic. What good is an unchanging form outside this world? In other words, big deal. So what? Arbitrary. Oh, Aristotle did it to him. So what did Aristotle point out about Plato's belief in their own ideas? He just demonstrated that it was arbitrary. We don't have contact with this ideal world, Plato. So what good is it? And why does the fact that you say it exists make it exist? It doesn't. It does not. Further, Aristotle is like, it doesn't explain motion. And Aristotle was pretty big on the issue of motion and then mover concept that he was talked about at one point. Motion always happens in this world. So you have these unchanging concepts of logic and goodness and whatnot, but they don't have any relationship to this world. Okay, let's drill Plato on that just a little bit. What did Plato think of these things and how they related to this world? Well, he believed that the things in their physical realm participated in their form. Okay, same question. How do you know that and how does that work? Well, Plato tried to explain it by analogy, such as like actors playing a role. Like you could say, well, all the ducks are trying out for duckness or something like that. That's kind of weird. Many actors but one role is how you explain it, but it actually gets worse because the criticism for that is pretty simple. We're trying to explain the basic nature of reality, Plato, and you're giving me a metaphor. Even worse, if we were to ask Plato how the forms inform the material world, how do these forms get there? How? Do you understand the question? How is it that the forms which are in one realm get to the material world in the first place that cause us to recognize individual particular things in this world when the realms are forever separate? How do you cross that divide, so to speak? How do they get from one to the other? Huh.
Big Bang was a dimensional wormhole that opened up and allowed material from one dimension to enter and void
I don't
to the
think
other.
Plato was quite that sophisticated.
Infinity gauntlet.
Wow. Think of it this way. We're not going to be quite that sophisticated. I want to talk about cookies because I like
Evolution,
cookies.
They got there by evolution,
There it is. I want to talk about cookies. I'll think of it this way. You have a bunch of sugar cookie dough, big old blob of it sitting on your counter. You smooth it out with your ruler. And you decide you want duck cookies, because ducks are all we talk about. And you get a duck-shaped cookie cutter. So what do you have to do in order to get your duck-shaped cookies? You have to bring them together. You have to bring the cookie cutter together with the dough and impress it, the form onto the material in order to get your duck shape. Because if you don't get ducks. You don't get duck cookies. It just doesn't happen. So how how did it happen, Plato? How did the cookie cutter come into this blob of reality and impress itself, impose itself on it? How does Plato solve this problem? He knew it was a problem, but his answer is kind of silly. He had to resort to a myth. Ultimately, he had to resort to a myth. He claimed there's something called the demiurge that imposed the forms on the material world many years ago. Wait. What? This is a story. And really, it's a story that he didn't even believe to be true. When pressed, he had to admit something. I don't know. Beats me. You cannot have a worldview that arbitrarily assigns a demiurge to make the cookies, or that it's just an actor playing a role. At the end of the day, with his entire philosophical system, he ends up destroying himself and falling on the sword of arbitrariness. It's kind of like Aristotle said. Why should we even think this realm exists? Because you say so? Wow. Who are you, Plato? Aristotle goes a completely different direction as a result of that. So we'll talk about him briefly. We're going to add Aristotle to this mix. Mix some really weird looking cookies. Aristotle was not interested in things that were outside of time and space. He only cared about the things that were inside time and space, as those were the only things he thought were helpful. So he understood the forms or universals as being internal to the particulars, rather than ultimately being outside of the particulars in a different realm. He realized that Plato's attempt to bring ideals, okay, that's right. He realized that Plato's attempt to bring ideals into contact with the material realm could not be justified. He could believe it, but he couldn't prove it or justify it. Remember what we said before? If you're going to have true knowledge, you have to be able to have good reason for it, justify it. It's got to be true, and you have to believe it. Further, that in itself results in arbitrariness, having a belief without having a good reason for it. In order to know something, it has to be not just true, but justified. Plato, Aristotle said, couldn't justify his position, so his position was to be abandoned. And Aristotle was right about that. If you can't demonstrate it or prove it, then you're just saying, well, this is what I believe. Well, who cares what you believe? You can't prove it. You can't demonstrate it. Nope, not going that way. So, what do we do with people that say that they do not believe in our God, but believe in ideals, things like justice and evil and good? People like Plato and Aristotle, because they fall together in this particular situation. We ask, like we did with the so-called atheists that we interact with on social media sometimes, from within your worldview, how can justice be an absolute? Where do you get it? Because in your worldview, everything is changing or moving. How can justice or any other concept then be objective or absolute? Oh. And all the happiness for them that they claim to be pursuing with their idea of the greatest good, whatever makes the most people happy, or brings them happiness to the most people, has a critical flaw. Because without objective justice, there's not going to be a lot of happiness. So, people insist that these ideals do exist. Ask, okay, where? They might try to say the question's unimportant, and you come back and ask what the relationship is between ideals and the world in which we live. That's the problem Plato couldn't answer. No idealist can answer it. How do you bring concepts into contact with the physical world? Christians like, well, that's because that's how God made us. He made us in his image, and therefore we have knowledge, righteousness, holiness, and be able to think and reason through these things. It's part of our constitution because that's how God made us. Problem solved. As a Christian, I don't have a problem with this at all. As an idealist, you can't get past this. Aristotle's unmoved mover can't do it either. As such a thing in his thinking is really an arbitrary concept to get his own system going. He falls on the same sort as Plato does. It all collapses. As I said, as a Christian, easy. Not a problem. God made everything in all reality, and all of it ultimately lies with him. He's the one who put concepts into our minds, such as logic and duckness. And we need a different concept. Definitely not gooseness, though. That's one of those things that doesn't have form. But God put those things into our minds. That's why we can recognize them. That's how our minds work. He designed them that way, to reflect him in some way, I might add. God created things with certain characteristics. I've been talking a lot today, I'm sorry. They flow from his eternal sovereign mind. It comes from him. It's easy to do. And that exhausts what we're going to cover when it comes to generally irreligious worldviews. Because you get secular people that are going to try to hold those kinds of things. They'll follow Plato, they'll follow Aristotle. By and large, they're going to be atheistic materialists and believe in evolution. That's the big thing you're going to encounter. But those are the other ones that will show up for the non-religious worldviews. But wait, there's more. There are religious worldviews. Go figure. So let's talk about comparative religion to some degree. So now, somebody comes along and they claim that they are able to hold all this together because they have another religion different from yours. Oh, okay. They claim that they can account for things like truth and logic because they have their own God or their own gods and their own holy book. Okay. Aside from the reality that we need to deal with different religions, this is really important because of this fact that there are other religions are out there and they're going to make claims like that. Even many Christians have objected to the kind of apologetics that I've been teaching. They, other Christians, are going to claim that it works fine against secular worldviews, but it doesn't work against religious ones, they say. I'm here to tell you that that's bogus. That's completely false. It's silly. Entirely without merit. Because religious worldviews are just other worldviews and they're handled much of the same way. We're going to look at how. Because they're going to end up falling, and maybe these religious worldviews are either arbitrary, or maybe they're inconsistent, or maybe they have consequences that you don't want, or maybe they can't justify them. The same thing. We run it through the same issue. The same test. We get the same results. So first, we're going to talk about 3 different kinds of religious philosophy. Then, we're going to show how each of them, both generally and specifically, fall before the absolute truth of the Christian worldview. There isn't anything that can mount any kind of attack. It doesn't exist. Let's talk about religions of transcendent mysticism. These religions place an emphasis on what goes beyond man's experience. That is, they're transcendent. That means it goes beyond our rational experience. They come to be mystical in their outlook, meaning that eventually they're going to give up rationality and have some sort of reliance on some sort of internal intuition or enlightenment or some mystical experience. Hinduism is a religion of this sort. We have already given the illustration of the Hare Krishna last time, so let's review on that a little bit. The problem is that if everything is a mystical experience and that everything in this world is illusion, how can you really say anything meaningful about it? How can you even know about it? You can't even have sentences that distinguish one thing from another, the subject from the verb, a question from a statement, because it's all illusion, it's all maya, as they said. There are no distinctions. They will tell you that their religion is beyond logic. And after that kind of objection, what do you say to them? You can give up logic? If you reject logic, then you don't.
So you're saying that your system is contrary to logic.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, so your system is contrary to logic, which means that it's logical.
Just another way to say the same thing. Because you
that
can't escape that.
You just invoked the law of non-contradiction.
Yep.
And that is a system of logic.
You can't escape it. They can
You
say
can't
what they
escape
want, but you can't get around it. It's because contradictions are fine with that logic. See, you have logic because contradictions do exist. You'll get the response, well, then I'm not going to talk to you. Okay, well, then what?
Not talking is the best way to promote a non-logical worldview. Because the moment you talk, you use a noun, you invoke the law of identity, and the law of non-contradiction, the law of exclusion, that you use them the second you say a word. So be quiet.
Yes. So they stop talking, like, well, in that case, pray for him. Tell him that you're doing so.
Yeah.
Because the Holy Spirit can reach people who's not going to listen to you. You can't stop the hound of heaven, as the Reformers call it, the Puritans did.
Yes.
So this category of transcendent mysticism, we pull down Hinduism completely. After all, it is the primary such religion in the world today that holds that particular standard of religion of transcendent mysticism. We already know what they believe. This world is illusion. It's Maya. They believe we're all trying to get to nirvana, and that we're only going to get there if we properly meditate and get off the wheel of life, the wheel of reincarnation. We're building up karma in this world, and when we die, that karma is going to determine whether we are reincarnated as an aardvark, or a Brahma bull, or better yet, we enter the shoreless ocean of being, as we discussed before. We talked about the Hare Krishna, like I mentioned. Hare Krishnaism, for practical purposes and how we're going to deal with it, think of it as a domination of Hinduism. That's probably an easy way to think about it. And you can refute the Hindu the same way the Hare Krishna. You ask questions. You have to keep asking, how do you know this? How are you sure of this? That is the big question. By what standard do you measure it? Hinduism. Oh, a couple slides behind. There it is. All right. The temptation for some people is that when they press the Hindu with enough how do you know questions, is that eventually they think he's going to do this. They go, well, the Bhagavad Gita says whatever. This is something that has come up recently because of our new head of the FBI, who's a professing Hindu, who got sworn in on a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. But you see, this isn't how it works in Hinduism. Hindus do not appeal to the Bhagavad Gita the same way we appeal to the Bible. Hinduism isn't really a scriptural religion. It's not to say that it doesn't have its sacred writings. The Bhagavad Gita is one of them, but it doesn't function for them the same way the Bible functions for us. He doesn't get his creedal position from it, his moral norms, that doesn't come from it. So even if the Hindu were to say he bases his beliefs on it, we'll ask him why. He says, so why do you believe the Bible? Okay, so what do we say? He says, well, why do you believe the Bible? What do we say?
It's God's word.
It is the word of God. Well, why is that important? How do you know that? Well, here's the thing. If the Bible were true, you wouldn't have a basis for believing anything in the first place. You couldn't demonstrate things like logic and morality and all those other things. But my God, the triune God of Scripture, isn't the God overall, has revealed himself in Scripture, given us this understanding. We can't know anything. It's one of the preconditions of intelligibility that we were talking about before. Even truth itself. But so the Hindu says he has his basis of belief from the Bhagavad Gita, which is an interesting statement. Again, it doesn't really work that way, but I have a basis for believing what I believe in this book. Like, okay, so let's do this then. Open your Bhagavad Gita and show me the basis for the loss of logic. Well, that's going to be a problem. Justify scientific inference. Provide the basis for moral absolutes. That's going to be really hard to do because what's one of the foundational beliefs of Hinduism? There are no distinctions, which means there's no good or evil. You can't get moral absolutes if you don't have a distinction between good and evil. Say that again.
All Atman is Brahman. All of everything.
Oh, okay.
God is everything, basically.
The pen or emphasis or whatever.
Yep.
You see, we need to remember this. We're not just saying that we have a book, the Bible, and another religion has their book or teaching, and our book is just better. It is better, but that's not really the point. We're saying that God has revealed himself. He is the ultimate authority. We believe his revelation on his say-so, and if you don't take him at his word, then you are reduced to foolishness. It happens every time, without exception, without failure, even before breakfast. And it goes back to the questions that the Apostle Paul asked at the beginning of the book of 1 Corinthians. We'll get there in a second. 1 Corinthians 1:20, where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Yes, he has. Just because you call something a religious worldview does not mean it plays by different rules. It doesn't. It plays by the same rules. Because they're all the philosophies of men. And they will therefore collapse if they seek to oppose the one true God and what he's revealed to us. So when someone presents to you a religious worldview, just strip off the fact that it's religious. As far as we're concerned, it's just another worldview. Just another one of men's philosophies that will result in foolishness, subjectivism, and skepticism. Do the same internal critique that you would do for non-religious worldviews, and they will collapse all the same. Don't forget the refutation of the Hare Krishna. Well, if you don't believe in logic, then you do. And everything that Kip mentioned in relation to that moments ago, it's the same way. So we're going to move on from Hinduism. Because the Hare Krishna or the Hindu is either going to give up his religion or he's going to give up logic and won't be able to he can't think or talk to you. Religions of imminent moralism as another category of religious worldviews. It's kind of the opposite of the one we just talked about. You have the religions of transcendent mysticism. The other side of the spectrum, all the way to the other side, are religions of imminent moralism. These religions do not stress what is beyond, but rather what is at hand, the close, the nearby. They don't want to deal with the transcendent. They want to deal with what is right here, imminent to us. Some of them, like Buddhism, are atheistic, which I find very strange because of how Buddhism started. But they reject transcendent reality at all. Buddhism does. If they do religions like this, if they do affirm a God of sorts, then the stress is on a God or on religious forces that are part of our experience. They tend to be moralistic, not mystic. There is an ethical code that you must keep and live it out if you're going to be a proper religious person. Some sort of ethical code. Buddhism is our prime example of our religion of immanent moralism. Buddhism. The founder, Siddhartha Gautama, grew up in a Hindu environment. Maybe his name is the other way. I've seen it both ways. He renounced the life of luxury and renounced the world in general. He was said to have had a vision where he saw 4 passing sights. An old man, a sick man, a dead man, and a shaven monk. This leads him to join an ascetic Hindu cult where he almost beat himself to death. How does that work exactly? I don't know. I mean, given the options, maybe the monk. But after nearly dying, as I mentioned, he decided it would be a good idea to find out a way to understand the meaning of suffering and how to avoid it. This led him to his idea of a middle way between pleasure and suffering. That is what he was trying to get to. It supposedly came to him when he was under a fig tree, when he claimed he was tempted by Mara, the evil one of Hinduism. Which is why I don't get why it's atheistic, because apparently you have some evil god tempting you. I don't know how that works. But what's interesting about this, though, sitting under a fig tree and tempted by the evil god of Hinduism. That sound familiar to anybody? Eve, a fruit tree, tempted by the devil. Interesting how much similarity we have an account of this, right? God has the true story, and this kind of story ended up getting passed down and corrupted through various cultures. That's what ended up happening, but anyway. Siddhartha Gautama went on to claim that there were no gods at all. Considering how he was tempted, this is weird. And when he overcame this temptation, he became the Buddha, which means the enlightened one. He went into a rapturous state for about 49 days after this and claimed that there indeed was something wrong with the human race because of the amount of suffering out there. So he had something to tell people, but he didn't want people to believe what he told them just because he said it. He wanted them to experience it for themselves and find out the truth of it after having experienced it. Now, this is how religions of immanent moralism work. They deny outside authority or transcendent revelation. There are no gods, and even the Buddha doesn't have any authority. Rather, you accept it only when it becomes part of your experience. It's immanent to you. It's kind of experience as you go religion, having experiences that help reduce and eliminate your suffering. Where does suffering come from? Well, it comes from man's desire. You can ask him a question about that too. Your desire has caused your suffering. So did you desire to get rid of your suffering? Man, just ruin it off the bat, why don't you? Anyway, so in case you're wondering, there are similarities here to Stoicism that we talked about before.
Star Wars.
Yeah, George Lucas was a Buddhist. That's where the idea of the Force and all that stuff came from, because he's a Buddhist. But anyway, in order to achieve these kinds of experiences, according to Buddhism, you need to follow what's called the Eightfold Path. It's a moralistic cast of the religion. Do these things, and don't do these other things. And then you'll end up having to provide experiences to get rid of suffering and get rid of your desire. So what do you need to do? Well, the Eightfold Path. So get rid of lust. Don't kill anything. Get rid of lust, don't kill anything, express the will to overcome evil, meditate properly, consider your body loathsome. Okay, well.
Okay, it's in the mirror today.
Yeah, it's not hard. I keep telling people I wear the beard for their protection. I'm telling you what, there's truth to this. But now the fun part, refutation. I click that up. Someone comes up to you and says, hey, you need to get into sin. It's the way to be. So what do you do? So what do I do? I'm supposed to get into Zen. Well, then they're told about the Eightfold Path, especially the importance of meditation, the importance of dwelling on the question, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Being serious. You know, Bonson once jokingly said, if someone like if someone comes up to you and asks you what the sound is of one hand clapping, then slap him across the face, and then after you find out what the answer to the question is, get back to the world's reason. That's how it sounds. Let's talk about something meaningful, please. Anyway, I don't recommend you slap atheists, but I mean, you know. Anyway, what should you do? We should do the same thing like we do with everybody else. We should ask, how do you know that Zen is the way to be? Until it's amazing, right? Well, the response is going to be what? What do you think? How do you know? How do you know it's the way?
Well, if they're consistent, it's going to be, well, because that's what I've experienced. That's my experience. Because if you say the Buddha said it, then they're violating their own religion, right? So,
sure.
So
you can ask the questions. Well, who says we should go to participate in them? Who says that? Well, the Buddha, the Enlightened One, did say that.
Did they have a book that says that?
I don't remember. I'm sure there are some things that are written down in sayings of the Buddha.
the
I don't know what it's
Taoist,
called. But the Buddha, the Enlightened One, says it's a good idea, right? Kip's already tipped his hand on that one. He's getting ahead of my own slideshow here. But see, that's a problem because the Buddha said not to believe it because the Buddha said it.
I was looking at my slideshow.
Your slideshow? Oh, you got your own philosophy class pulled up over here. Cheater.
It's been a minute since I taught
Mine's
philosophy.
better because it's yellow.
Okay.
Now, yours is more thorough, I'm sure. But the Buddha said not to believe it because he said it's why should I believe it then? Well, the Buddhist is probably going to say that you should believe it because you experience it, right? But I haven't experienced it. The Buddha said, well, you should experience it. But I'm trying to find out why I should. Maybe I won't like it. Maybe it's not worth my time.
Should I desire to experience it?
That too. So the Buddhist is probably going to try, okay, let me give you an account of my own experience, how good it was. You can put that down, though. Who's going to know more about the Buddhism experiences? Him or the Buddha? Well, the Buddha is, because he's the one that started this whole thing off, right? And what did the Buddha say about it? Not to take his word for it. So why should I take this lesser Buddhist word for it?
Right.
Oh! I mean, for all I know, Mr. Buddhist, it's like you're saying, hey, there's a concrete mixer truck across the street. Let's go stick our heads in it. It'll be great. Why should... No. But you don't know until you try it. I don't want to try it. You can't give me any compelling reason to do so. Seriously, though. What is the Buddhist doing? He's telling you to turn off your brain, turn off your mind, let go of your thinking process. Have perfect detachment and go into some sort of mindless state where you have no desire or suffering. By the way, never do that. Don't turn off your minds. Don't stop thinking. I mean, you could ask the question this way, why not death? I mean, if somebody kills you, you're dead, and your suffering's over, man. No more suffering for you. But the Buddhist doesn't like that idea. He might appeal to the need to build up karma, but the Buddhist doesn't believe there's a soul, so how do you build up karma for yourself? At this point, he's probably going to take Plato's route and appeal to a myth. It's kind of like the flickering candle that passes its flame to another candle. Oh, okay, so is this flame me? No, because there is no soul to pass. Okay, but apparently I can pass my karma on to someone else? Well, yes. Oh, this is good.
So what I do, somebody else has to pay.
Yes! You bet! If I can pass my karma on to somebody else, eat, drink, and be merry, live like the devil, have no consequences. No, you can't do that. Why not? How do you know? The Buddhist has his way, but he has no foundation for it. And the Confucianist will say there's another way, and another standard. And the Taoist will say there's another way, and another standard. And the Shintoist will say there's another way. And who do you choose? Part of the refutation for religions of immanent moralism is there's so many of them. How do you know which standard is correct and which set of rules to follow? The arbitrariness shows up again because the Buddha said so, but not because he said so. Because Confucius say, why do I care what Confucius said? He was confused. He was confused. Just that's not what that means. Anyway, they have no foundational authority to justify living the way they claim that we ought to live. They fall into inconsistencies in that as well, such as with Buddhism, the example I gave about karma and passing it on. We mentioned Confucianism. Let's pick on him for just a minute. Confucianism. Follow the teachings of the master Confucius. It will make you a moral and religious person. Confucius say, so what? Why should I listen to him? Why? If I get pushed back, say, okay, well, fine. So who's Jesus? Oh, he's the Son of God. And he'll be the judge of all mankind. He created you. he is the one to whom you must give all allegiance, bow before him. I don't believe that. But see, Jesus is the moral authority, the King of heaven and earth. But Confucius was very wise, they say. He was great. Okay, well, how do you know he was very great and wise? God himself put his stamp of approval on Jesus. And you can hear talk about Jesus' moral authority. He really does account for morality as a whole. While Confucius or Buddha or whoever, what real authority did they have? Why do we have they put any stock at all in what they say? Who do I listen to? Buddha? Confucius? Garth from Wayne's World. I knew that guy was on something. Maybe the Angry Orange. He's one of the more modern philosophers. Maybe Snoop Dogg. Man, this is amazing. Where's the standard? How do we know? Not the Angry Orange. The problem with all these things is simply the same problem we end up with Plato and Aristotle. It's being arbitraries. Because this is what we say. That God, what are you grounding it in? Your own ideas. What is right and wrong and anything like that. All the moralistic faiths, by the way, also have no redemption. All you get is that you're told to try harder. So what do I do when I can't keep Confucius's rules? Try harder, do better. But I can't try harder. I can't do better. And what about the guilt for past failures in these sets of rule books? There's no help. There's no redemption. There's no way out of it. So for all their claims of moral superiority, they can't even take care of the fact that you can't deal with their own moral rule books. Give them enough rope. They keep themselves. A few questions for discussion. The three basic kinds of religious philosophies. Well, there are religions of transcendent moralism. Sorry, transcendent mysticism.
Transcendent?
Transcendent mysticism, immanent moralism. There's also another category I haven't talked about yet, I don't think, called biblical counterfeits. We're going to deal with those here in just a minute. So how did Aristotle, Plato's best student, refute him?
So what?
Effectively. He called him on his arbitraries. You say there's this other realm. How do you know that it exists? You don't. Shall we just take your word for it?
Yeah, well, I mean, Plato said it was a logical necessity. Aristotle said,
No, it wasn't.
no, it wasn't. And then Aristotle appealed to his own logical necessity, which was the unmoved mover. So, which is the foundation of the cosmological argument, which classical philosophers use, or classical apologists use even today. So
They do.
but again, it goes back to, well, you're just appealing to a logical necessity.
A logical necessity that you have arbitrarily decided is the one that's going to work.
Yeah.
It ends up falling on the same problem. Why do we need that? How does that account for everything? Well, ultimately, it doesn't. Buddha said not to believe in any authorities. Experience must be the basis of what you believe. How does that make religious authority arbitrary?
Is it subjective?
Because it's subjected to what?
My own experience.
My own experience. Each to his own. Completely arbitrary, right? Talk about some of the internal contradictions of Buddhist teaching when we had that rather amusing interaction with the pseudo-Buddhist.
I did have a talk with a Buddhist one time where we were waiting in line to talk to Jason Lyle, actually.
Really?
And we were talking, and at the end of the day, we ended up going for lunch. And we were going back and forth. And then I said, so what are you going to have for lunch? And he's going to go to some chicken place. I said, well, why are you going to go bother eating chicken? I mean, you and the chicken are already one. So why do you bother taking it into your body? But therein lies the problem. If all things are one, then why do things? Why talk to other people? Why exchange ideas? Why breathe? Well, because you're not the chicken. You're not the air. You have ideas. You're just reinforcing the illusion when you do all these things. The Maya. It was fun.
I would assume they wouldn't really participate in conversations because as soon as you push back, they would just be like, "Okay, that's cool. Like that's what you think. This is what I think."
Yeah.
You know,
And there are
your
those who do that.
experience is not my experience.
Sometimes
That's
people are going
cool.
to do that.
And they wouldn't really feel the need to engage. Like they wouldn't become aggressive or,
If they're in the U.S.,
yeah.
they do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You go over to where you have a Buddhist majority. I mean, ask the Burmese people up here because that's what Myanmar is. And they are wholly intolerant. That's why they're here. That's why the Chin and the Kachin are here, because they're Christians, and they are systematically persecuted against by the Buddhist majority. And you would think that in Hindu areas, the same thing. The Hindus are very intolerant to the point where they're burning your churches and
Ask Daniel Corney about how that works. He's a,
I've talked to some. I've not talked to him, but yeah.
He lives in Nepal.
Oh,
and he runs
Daniel
a-
Courtney. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
He entered
Yeah. Oh,
into
yeah.
public ministry all the time, and he's been beaten up, left for dead on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
think most of the people from India are
they're Hindu.
Hindu?
I mean, the vast majority of them are. Yeah,
Not Buddhist, but Hindu.
yeah.
That's India. Buddhism is more common in China.
China. Yeah.
But
India.
the third category here, biblical and Christian counterfeits. Because,
Cults.
yeah, cults. These are religions that have been influenced by the Bible in some way. And they have some concepts that seek to approach the biblical God, but they turn out to be fake as they do so. Well, sure. I wasn't going to get to that one. We have a whole class on them.
I know.
The audio files are still linked in our group on Facebook, by the way. But what they have done is that they have perverted the true revelation of God in one way or another.
Sure.
So they are biblical counterfeits. Under this section, there are two subsets of biblical Christian counterfeits. The religions are going to be either polytheistic, such as Mormonism, having many gods, a kind of a biblical-like view of God with significant errors in it. They think there are many such gods. Mormonism is the prime example here, and it is very popular in the United States. It's where it started. And there are others. Unitarian counterfeits. Unitarians follow some biblical principles, but they get the Trinity wrong. Instead of having the triune God of Scripture, they have a unitary, unipersonal God. They claim there's only one person in God. They will deny very often the deity of the Son or the deity of the Spirit. Jehovah's Witnesses do this. They're kind of Aryan in their belief systems. Islam even falls under this particular category. It is right, I believe, to consider Islam a biblical Christian counterfeit because of the authority structure and their, what am I looking for? The way they view the scriptures, the biblical scriptures, to some degree. A third category you might say is pseudo-messianic, and that's just a false Messiah figure. The Branch Davidians were a group like that. The Moonies in South Korea, Sun Myung Moon, they were like that, but they don't tend to last very long. In a short period of time is usually enough to see how foolish they are. And Sun Myung Moon's whole movement came to an end when he got locked up in federal prison for tax evasion. So, but remember, you don't have to master the details of everything on these either. You just need to know basic categories. And if you keep your opponent talking by asking the right questions, just like your religious worldviews, he's eventually going to hang himself, and you get an opening for the gospel.
Do they
So-
talk about God in every piece of the earth? The Unitarian.
One more time.
Okay, so
Do they
you're talking
promote
about
the idea that God is present in every piece of the universe?
you're talking
That's
about
different.
you're talking about the Unitarian
Uniitarian.
Church.
Unitarian
He's using
Universalists. No, I'm
Unitarian
sorry.
as he's using Unitarian as an adjective here.
As opposed to Trinitarian.
Oh,
Good question. Thank you for clarifying that. Two different kinds of biblical counterfeits. What are they? Polytheistic Mormonism, Unitarian, which is going to be Islam or Jehovah's Witnesses. And remember, religious worldviews do not have different rules from other kinds of worldviews when we examine them. They simply don't. So, we've talked about monism, the oneness idea. We've talked about dualism, two different kinds of matter, maybe body or spirit, mind or body. We talked about materialistic atomism. We talked about atheism. We talked about Plato's idealism. We talked about various religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, Confucianism, all sorts of things. Religions that are counterfeits, again, it will be Unitarian, polytheistic, Messianic. We need to keep in mind also, as we talk about these sort of things, we only ever defend the one true God. He is the only one who can provide the preconditions of intelligibility. We do not see eye to eye with Mormons or Muslims or Jehovah's Witnesses or any false religion, any Christian counterfeit. We defend only true Christian theism. After a brief description and a history of a few false religions, we run them through the AICP procedure just like anything else. They say they have their own God or their own revelation. Great. Let's look and see if it's arbitrary, if it's inconsistent, if it has terrible consequences, or if it can justify the preconditions of intelligibility. So here we go. Mormonism, also known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons. term Mormon comes from the angel Moroni, I believe.
They're trying to play that name down.
They are.
They're calling themselves LDS now, or Latter Day Saints, or whatever.
Same thing.
Yeah.
But they are the most prolific and popular polytheistic Christian counterfeit that exists today. Very much so. This fact surprises a lot of people that Mormons are polytheistic. It surprises the Mormons who are going to come to your door sometimes because they don't know their own faith very well. But the reality is that Mormonism is the most polytheistic religion in the world. Some of them even claim to believe in an infinite number of gods. That's pretty polytheistic. Even beats the 300 some odd million of the Hindus.
Right.
Now there's an LDS church building just a few minutes west of here on Stopple Road. Just over right next to the Steak and Shake, I believe, behind that Steak and Shake instead of 31 in Stopple. If you're in our backyard, you probably encounter the missionaries from time to time. They'll come knock on your door. Usually a couple of young men in white shirts and black ties with elder name badges. They're here to talk to you about another testament of Jesus Christ. No, you're not, but sure, we'll talk religion. Come on in. Let's talk. Last time I ran into them was when we took our trip to Richmond, Virginia, at a gas station in West Virginia. They were coming out and to talk with me for a little while. Shared with them very briefly. I was kind of tired and not thinking very clearly, but I did give them the gospel tract to challenge them on a couple of things. So let's unpack Mormonism a little bit, talk about its history, some of its doctrines, and show how it fails the AICB test. Joseph Smith was their founder. Joseph Smith was not an upright and decent human being. He was just not. He was tried and convicted as a glass looker. What is a glass looker? Peep stoner would be another term for it, not a peeping Tom. Not looking through glass windows, Tony. But he was a con man. He was a con man. He claimed he could look through a glass and determine where things are, like where to dig for a well or where to find buried treasure. What he would do in his case, he took a piece of glass, he put it into his hat, he'd stick his face in it, kind of look through it, and convince people that he had some special ability to find things, a glass looker. And he was tried and convicted as such in the state of New York. So before Joseph Smith became the prophet of God, he was a convicted con man. Mormons are kind of sensitive to this, you might imagine, but it's true. At the very least, then, it raises the possibility that Joseph Smith found another way to con people through religion. And yes, he did. When he was young, very young, mid to late teens, he was perplexed that there were so many religious denominations, as the story goes. The way he tells it, he goes into the woods, and when he was in the woods, he saw two personages there. One who pointed to the other and said it was his beloved son, and that Joseph Smith should pay attention and hear him. That sounds like Jesus' baptism experience. In any case, he claimed they told him to join no church. They were all wrong. And all the creeds of the Christian church were an abomination. Okay, so September of 1823, at the ripe mature age of 17, he had another alleged vision where he claimed the angel Moroni came to visit him and told him that God had a work for him to do. There was an account that he needed to find that was written on golden plates, which chronicled the history of a people that used to live in North America. These plates are buried on a hill nearby. Go dig them up. That's what he was told to do. Golden plates. The next day, he claims to go out to this location, and he finds them in this stone box. He wasn't allowed to take them, but he had to return to the same place over the next 4 years on the same day to consult them. Then, in 1827, Moroni gave him the plates for safekeeping. I don't know. That's how the story goes. He also eloped with a young lady named Emma Hale of Harmony, Pennsylvania during this interval. Why did he elope? Because his father refused to give her to a peep stoner. Emma should have listened to her father. Anyway, he eventually returned to his father-in-law's house at one point after he got married because of his persecution. People didn't like what he had to say about these plates and his history. But he allegedly at that point began to translate and copy the plates. A New York farmer got wind of some of this that was going on. He offered to publish what Joseph Smith was translating, by the name of Martin Harris. But he wanted proof that what he was translating was being done properly. So he was asking the kind of questions that we're supposed to be asking. You claim this is from God? Yeah. How do you know that? What proof do you have? Show me. demonstrate that what you're doing is correct. So, Joseph Smith claimed that the writing on the plates was in a language that he called Reformed Egyptian. So Martin Harris allegedly took the translation that he was making of the plates to a guy by the name of Charles Anton in New York City. He was a professor, a language professor. And Charles Anton was supposed to have said that the characters were a mix of languages, including Egyptian, Babylonian, and Arabic, which is not a single language, by the way. It's not something that you can read. But here's the problem. When Dr. Anton, when later on asked about this, swore that it never happened. And also stated what we all know today. There's no such thing as Reformed Egyptian. It doesn't exist. I'll get back to the story. Eventually, Joseph Smith got a secretary to write things down. The secretary was not allowed to see the plates as he was giving his translation. Joseph Smith would put up a sheet between them, and he did his translation and told him what it was that he needed to write down. The secretary would copy it down. Convenient, he couldn't see the plates that he was working on. All this is documented and true. Anyway, at the end of the process, when he claimed to have finished his translation, he and some others who were starting to follow him to some degree went into the woods to pray, and claims that they were met by met by John the Baptist, descended as a heavenly messenger. John the Baptist reportedly conferred upon Joseph Smith the Aaronic priesthood and his associate who was with him. They then claimed to begin to prophesy, understanding the scriptures in a way they hadn't before. Later on, they claimed that Peter, James, and John, the apostles, came to them and conferred on them the Melchizedekian priesthood on the shores of the Susquehanna River. Never mind, that particular priesthood has only been held by two people in the history of the world, and they are Melchizedek himself and Jesus. Maybe we shouldn't play games with this kind of stuff, guys.
So who gave the disciples the...
Yes, they claim to have a vision of Peter, James, and John.
Okay.
And that they are the ones who conferred on Joseph Smith and his colleague the Melchizedekian priesthood.
And who gave them the authority to bestow that?
Story, Tony. But that's a good question. That is a good question.
Look at this glass.
Look at this glass. Yes. Sorry. Oh, mercy.
Oh, you can't.
Now, moving ahead just a bit, he's got his translation, so to speak, done, right? Which they ended up calling the Book of Mormon, and it went on sale, having been published. Going on sale now on March 26th of 1830.
Sale, right?
Yeah, it went on sale.
Going on sale. Woo, raising money. Well, on April 6th of the same year, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was incorporated. They started with 6 members, and within a month they had 40 members. They did a lot of missionary work.
So that's just all the new wives.
Oh my. That actually came later. When the revelation of polygamy came to Joseph Smith, Emma wasn't very happy about it. Wonder why. But anyway, they did a lot of missionary work for their LDS organization to the Native Americans in Ohio. And that's where Smith claimed to get the revelation of a book that he called the Doctrine and Covenants, which is one of their books, the Doctrine and Covenants. The Pearl of Great Price is another one. The Book of Mormon and the King James Version of the Bible. And there's also Joseph Smith's version of the Bible, which is really interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, those are the sacred texts, because he did indeed revise the King James Bible. But subsequently, he also claimed to receive revelation that Jackson County, Missouri was, quote, the land of promise and the place for the city of Zion. Great. So he went over there. But the mobs attacked them, so they decided far west Missouri was better, and I guess that's God's city, I suppose, just had to move because the mobs were in trouble. But the state militia of Missouri also intervened after battles happened between the Mormons and some of the other settlers out there. Smith was imprisoned, but he escaped and then relocated to Illinois, settling in the town of Nauvoo, Illinois. It became a kind of a large city at the time by the standards of the day. It's just a small town today, but there is a Mormon temple there. A small army, the Nauvoo Legion, was formed of Mormons. In 1839, a small newspaper in the area published something unfavorable to them. Joseph Smith got wind of it, ordered the press to be destroyed, and the copies of the paper burned. The governor of Illinois was not very happy with this. Sent some troops and had him arrested. He was released a little bit later, but then rearrested with his brother and placed into jail in Carthage, Illinois. A mob found out where he was in this jail, attacked the jail, and killed Joseph Smith when he was being held. Wonderful. The Mormon Church now how to market. And arguably, this is what has led to their success more than anything else. Everybody loves marketing. And it also created other problems. See, Joseph Smith had his legal opponents too. And his legal opponents were on the verge of demonstrating that these supposed golden plates that he had discovered were actually money counterfeiting plates. He was making fake money with them, but now he was dead, and the legal case couldn't go forward. People were starting to see him as a hero instead. As an aside, mob justice isn't justice. What they did was murder. Only the state has the jurisdiction to put somebody to death, not the mob. Obey God's ways, or we get stuff like Mormonism. Seriously. Anyway, there were struggles in the LDS Church. There was a move to Utah by Brigham Young and other things. This bit of background is probably sufficient for our purposes for the moment. So, by what authority do Mormons teach what they teach? What do they believe? What do they teach? Well, they have a set of articles of faith. In one of their articles of faith, they have this claim that the Bible is the Word of God insofar as it can be translated correctly. That's their claim. That's convenient. But it is official Mormon doctrine. If you get a copy of their scriptures, they get a quad, which has all four of them together for the great prize, the English version of the Bible, Doctrine and Covenants, in the Book of Mormon. Then if you open the first page, it'll list those there for you. They'll tell you what they believe. So that's important. This is Mormon doctrine. It's part of their worldview. Their theory of knowledge, their epistemology includes that God has revealed himself, at least in part, through the Bible. At least where it's translated correctly, right? So, don't forget, religious worldviews are just other worldviews. They have philosophical presuppositions, like everything else. With the Mormons, translation comes down to adding more revelation. Revelation that can't be checked by a third party. You're just supposed to believe what Joseph Smith said about things like the Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price. They believe that he was translating the Book of Mormon correctly, because there's no way to justify it, right? And they do believe the Book of Mormon. They believe it as the Word of God, but they list it in their belief statement without the qualification that they give to the Bible. They don't say it's the Word of God as far as it can be translated correctly. So effectively, they put it ahead of the Bible. Of course, what cults do. Now, Joseph Smith did have a revision of the Bible. That's
Presumptuous.
very.
Right.
It's kind of a rewrite in some ways. For example, in Genesis chapter 3, in the Joseph Smith revision of the Bible, there is an account where Satan makes an offer to God to redeem mankind. In chapter 6, we have Adam being baptized by immersion. Anyway, we also have a long prophecy by Enoch, rather than just a passing comment that we actually have in the genealogical records. We learn that a man's ability to propagate sexually rested on his fall into sin. Funny how that would be fruitful, multiplied thing came before there was sin, right? And lastly, we discover this very important piece of information. In the 50th chapter of Genesis, we have a prediction of the appearance of Joseph Smith. I mean, it's just so absurd. Like, wow, that's really convenient. But I mean, reading the Book of Mormon too isn't a bad idea. Note what they say double. You can find it online just like you can most things. As you do so, it's going to prove to be a joke. There's no persuasive power. There's no convicting authority. It doesn't even come across as overly religious. You're going to come away from it concluding that somebody has things really messed up when he's playing games. The fact that Joseph Smith was a con man will become increasingly relevant. We do have several contradictions, of course, between the Book of Mormon and the Bible. In Deuteronomy chapters 13 and 18, we see that we are to test into any further revelation that God gives by what has come before. God does not contradict himself. So anything that claims to come after needs to line up with what he's already said. God doesn't change. He doesn't change his mind. Since the Mormons claim the Bible has an authority, this becomes extremely useful. They've given you the Bible already. Run with it. Show how the Bible refutes their claims. According to the teaching of the Mormon Church, there is a plurality of gods. Some would say an infinite or uncountable number of them. And each of these gods either has his own universe or some interpretations his own planet and solar system. Kola, where the god of this world may be residing. Or you could go to the Shema, Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. God explicitly states that there's only one God, there's no one like him, etc. Yeah. So they have a plurality of gods, a really big one. Here's the one that's interesting. Women who engage in celestial marriage will have the privilege of bearing children for all eternity, with the souls they bear entering into human bodies as these human bodies come available. Okay? I didn't make it up. Anyway, people who live up to the teachings of the Book of Mormon have the prospect of going on to godhood themselves and getting a universe of their own that they will populate through their celestial marriage. That's what the gospel is to Mormons, by the way. Ascension to godhood. It doesn't have anything to do with Jesus imputing righteousness to us by his word. Brigham Young, who was the second president of the Mormon Church, claimed that the God of this world is Adam. It's not in their official documents, but he was the second president of the Mormon Church, and he taught it exactly that way. They also claim that gods are material, not just spiritual. Therefore, these gods undergo change. So then we simply bring what the scriptures have to say to bear. Remember, they give you the King James Version of the Bible. So does the Bible teach that God is a material being? No. God is spirit. Jesus, of course, has a body. Did you talk about the Father, the Spirit, or before the incarnation especially? No. Is God's name Adam? No. Is there more than one God? No. Though all of these can be addressed biblically, and they should be, the most important, I think, has to be the issue monotheism versus polytheism. About the most foundational truth in Christianity is the fact that there's only one God. Be very familiar, like I said, with passages like the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. As well as Isaiah chapters 40 through 48. This is sometimes called the trial of the false gods. In that section, God is repeatedly singled out as the only true God to the exclusion of all others. Perhaps the most notable and useful passage in that section is Isaiah 44:6-8, which reads, Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first, and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. Who is like me? Let him proclaim it. Let him declare and set it before me, since I appointed an ancient people. Let him declare what is to come and what will happen. You want to claim there's another God? Okay, tell me what the future is going to be. You can't. The one true God can. Fear not nor be afraid. Have I not told you from of old and declared it? You're my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? There is no rock. I know not any. Case closed. There's one God. Or maybe even the first verse of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You see, the true God created everything out of nothing. According to Mormon doctrine, their God just created, didn't even really create, he just rearranged pre-existing matter. Matter is eternal in the Mormon understanding. All of these are important to point out to Mormons when you're talking to them. And look up some references in their own documents to such things too. When you point these things out, you'll probably be told the Bible's been corrupted. They're the ones who've worked this out and finally come to the truth. Right.
But it says the same thing in your Bible.
Yes.
The Isaiah 44:6-8 passage, that's a very useful one also. You'll get to Joe's witnesses here in a bit. I don't know if it's tonight or next time, but
I'm not going to deal with it really in depth.
yeah, but I have a copy of their scriptures, and I've highlighted that passage in there, and then gone over to, for example, in Revelation 22:13, where Jesus says, "I am the Alpha, the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." And so, because their scripture says it about Yahweh or Jehovah in Isaiah, and then Jesus, and that's one that they forgot to change.
Yeah, they also messed it up when you compare Hebrews 1 to John 12 to Isaiah 6. Because the one that John says that Isaiah saw was Jesus.
Yeah.
But he's Yahweh, the one true God Almighty.
Yeah.
That's a problem for the Jehovah's Witnesses.
And it's in their Bible.
It is. Yeah, absolutely it is. So it's a great way to refute them. They have serious problems. They think that Jesus was the Archangel Michael and the created being, which is no. But what you're going to get from Mormons, people love to say this. They want to say that the Bible we have is corrupted. Again, that's part of Mormon doctrine with regards to the Bible being translated correctly. Okay, well, you say my Bible's been corrupted. Yes, we have the truth. Okay. What you need to do then is ask, How do you know that? We keep coming back to that question, don't we? Asking for documentaries. How do you know that the Bible that I have translated? I can talk to you about textual criticism, the history of the documents, the New and Old Testaments. I can talk to you about the P72 and P45. I can talk to you about the Dead Sea Scrolls. All these wonderful testimonies that we have. I can talk to you about all that. So what's your evidence then that your translation of the Bible, or even Joseph Smith's version, where's your evidence that the Bible that we are holding is corrupted? Show me the textual evidence. Guess how much they're going to be able to provide you?
In fact,
Absolutely none.
one of the claims that they make is that the Native Americans who came over to the United States, what would eventually become the United States, were actually a lost tribe of Israel.
I recall that, yeah.
And the hilarious thing,
Nephites with the Lamanites or
Nephites.
some ites. They have really weird histories of the Americas that they try to put on people.
Well, the funny thing about it is that the Brigham, and you can look this up, it's a matter of record, Brigham Young University, which is a Mormon college,
It's in Salt Lake City, yeah.
they went and did genetic testing. And guess what they found out? That the Native Americans were not, in fact, known to be related to any Semitic group whatsoever. Because, the Bible talks a little bit about the Japhethites. It goes all the way back that far. So even their own prophets have said, I use that phrase a lot, sorry.
That's fine.
Their own sources of authority.
But here's the problem. Since they can't provide you any evidence for it, they can't demonstrate it, that makes their claims arbitrary. Game over. It's been corrupted. How do you know? Well, that's just what I think. Try again. I have no reason whatsoever to believe you. You don't have reason to believe you. Because you don't have any proof of your claim. What they'll probably say is that they have their prophet, Joseph Smith, the one who has the dual priesthood of Aaron and Melchizedek. And he gave them their revelation from God. He's the one who can be trusted. So what do you ask in response to that? You say Joseph Smith can be trusted. How do you know he can be trusted? It was a con man!
Like, that was before all this.
I know.
It's like,
How do you know? It's like, well, he discovered these golden plates and we got the Book of Mormon from them.
Why'd you kill him?
What?
Why'd you kill Joseph Smith if he was such a revered?
Was there a mob wanting his head? That's a fair question. But we have these golden plates. Like, well, has anyone ever seen those plates? Well, no, but they were Reformed Egyptian, and Joseph Smith translated them. Next question. Is there any documentation in the history of the world that Reformed Egyptian is a language, or was that just Joseph Smith's claim? And then what do you find in this claim about Smith's reliability? There's no evidence for that either. That's arbitrary. See, we apply this principle later on. We give the unbeliever enough rope, we keep asking questions, and it collapses on itself just like all of the irreligious worldviews. The Mormon has already hung himself to a large degree, but there's more. We'll hit the more real quick, and then we'll be done for the day. We won't talk about Islam. The languages of the Book of Mormon, we talked about Reformed Egyptian a little bit already, because they couldn't have been translated unless there was an additional miracle. In Mormon, which is actually a book in the Book of Mormon, there's the Book of Mormon, there's Mormon, chapters, whatever. Chapter 9, verses 32 34. They have an admission that Reformed Egyptian, the language claimed for the plates that Joseph allegedly found, is not a Hebrew language. And no one knows it. Like, what did you say, your own prophets have said?
yeah.
Fail. Martin Harris, the guy we talked about before, he couldn't read it. He wasn't able to read it. Neither could Professor Charles Anton. They can't really Reformed Egyptian. Why? Because it doesn't exist.
Right.
Miraculously, it's a heavenly language. Oh, okay. Do we have any manuscripts to consult about this language? No. Any ancient witnesses to draw from? No. We're simply told to take one man's word for it, for what he claimed it to be, and this was a convicted con man who's telling us all this. The Book of Mormon, in the side of passages, also admits that Hebrew would have been a better language to use for it, but the plates weren't large enough for the Hebrew script. And you're not big enough to make bigger plates.
Wait a minute. Egyptian is way bigger than Hebrew. Like the pictures.
But it's reformed. But it's reformed. The pictures
So-
are smaller.
So one of the interesting stories about him, Smith, is back then there were all kinds of these people who were dealing in antiquities. He actually bought a series of papyrus that were in Egyptian, and in his time, Egyptian was not a known language. He buys this.
You talking about the Book of the Dead Scrolls?
Yes. So he buys
This is so embarrassing.
he buys these papyrus, and he claims to have translated them, in that they're a story about Abraham, the life of Abraham,
yes,
biblical Abraham, and he even talks about them going back to the time of Abraham or close to or whatever. And at the time, Egyptian was not known. Well, then we find the what do you call it?
Rosetta Stone.
Rosetta Stone, yes. We find the Rosetta Stone, which has Greek, Egyptian, Latin, or Hebrew on the other side. I forget it, but we know the other two very well, and that's how they broke the code for Egyptian. They were rediscovered in 1960 something, and it was determined that they were not anything about Abraham. It was the actual Book of the Dead, the funerary text, the Necronomicon is what it's called.
Yes, it was extremely sexually inappropriate too, I might add, and some of the things that were recorded in it. So Joseph Smith made it up. I think he got one word right, the word "the" once. I believe that happened when he was quote unquote translating the Book of Abraham. The con man comes to the surface. This is public record for us. But yet we have millions of Mormons. Presuppositional philosophical commitments. The problem of sin, of course, are very powerful things indeed. But anyway, what was it? What's this other problem? Here we are. Brass plates. Oh yeah, there's also a claim in the Book of Mormon that the entire Old Testament, around the time up to that point, that had been written. The Book of Malachi came later, but up to that point was written on brass plates up to the time of Zedekiah. Except we don't have any evidence that such plates like that exist from that time period. No archaeological evidence for them has been discovered at all, and certainly not to that level of writing on that kind of metal plate. People write things on metal sometimes, sure, but not like that. So once again, there's no evidence for it. It's an arbitrary claim. It's one that doesn't have any historical basis. I don't know. But also, the Book of Mormon has been revised since the original publishing in 1830. But the original edition was claimed to be an inspired translation. So how do you revise an inerrant copy? These are questions that need to be asked. See, this is what it means to do an internal critique. You go into the worldview of the unbeliever and watch it burn to the ground. Go in and wreak havoc on their own claims. The Mormon story destroys itself, and this really is the Mormon story. We haven't even done any positive work, really. They're just hanging themselves. Beyond that, we've already said and provided some examples of it. The Mormons, with anyone else who claims the Bible or any part of the Word of God is part of their belief system, then all you have to do is take their beliefs and compare them with what the Bible actually teaches. They're refuted once contradictions arise. We've done that with Mormons today. The inconsistency of the Mormon position is evident. They're arbitrary. We've seen that a couple of times. On what basis do they really believe the Book of Mormon and affirm it because Joseph said so? And they say, if you pray about it, then you're going to understand it too. And Joseph was a con man. His opinions, therefore, were subjective. They were arbitrary. They were inconsistent. And Mormonism is a total failure. There's nothing reasonable about it at all. It is a false religion. It's not Christian. And they need to be evangelized, just like any other unbelieving position. They believe in a false Christ, a false infinite number of gods. They need three questions of salvation. Next time, we will talk about that. But it's after 7 o'clock. Islam is very popular these days.
Yeah.
And its influence is growing exponentially in Europe. And I'm not even sure there's enough time left to save Europe in that regard. Maybe judging them. What Islam is doing by biology, they're doing it when they're never able to do it with the sword. But yeah. Anyway, we'll talk about Islam next time.
You were saying John Smith said he was a prophet, or did he?
Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith.
Yes, he claimed to be a prophet.
Okay, I have another incident of that, personal, that I know. See if you've ever heard of this one.
Okay.
Bill Branham started a church in Jeffersonville, and he claimed he was the last prophet. A girlfriend of mine went to that church when she was 6 years old. Her mother was a member, played the piano, and she remembers being there when she was 6 years old. And it was at that time called Pentecostal. It was at Jeffersonville, and some of the building there where they used and had a store is still there.
Interesting.
I've been by there. So he claimed that he was the last prophet
Pretty common
and
to do
built
that.
that church on that.
Sun and moon did something similar.
There are many
And
who say
somehow I
that
remember
Jesus
the word message. I'm not sure if it was called that. I thought it called something like that.
Anywho. Any further questions, comments? About 10 after. Thank you all for praying with me. I've been talking a lot today. But God has been faithful. All right, let's pray. We'll give thanks to God, and then we'll go out and spread some unbelieving worldviews maybe this week and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Our Lord and God, we do pray that we do just that we would have opportunities to destroy every argument that wants to raise us up against the truth of Jesus Christ. And that by His grace, we replace it with the truth of the gospel. The only hope of salvation. The only hope of having rationality, quite honestly. May your praise and glory be advanced through our church. Thank you for what we got to learn tonight. Amen. Safe trips home. Be ready to hope again. All right. Islam. Maybe Unitarian. I don't know. I'll stop the recording first. Folks at home, you don't get to know what I say next.
My younger sister attended a Unitarian church in Richmond years ago.
Yeah, they're one of those Christian cults as well. I mean, they
Yeah,
they
that's what I
are.
thought at the time.
Yeah.
And then she's the one, she's receiving retirement or